Hi guys, welcome back. This time I am not in my living room or in my filming room. I am actually in my classroom, and I'm gonna start this second part of the series, which is writing an IEP. Now, I have my computer in front of me. It's not because I'm trying to be rude. It's because I'm actually gonna be writing an example IEP on my screen. So part of this video, you'll see my screen as I'm typing, and then I'll be kind of narrating and talking to you. Getting comfortable. It's strange because I stayed after school for another like 30 minutes just to film this. So it's kind of strange as like everyone is gone in my school and like the kids from after school are playing in the playground, which I can kind of see through the windows. And so I'm trying to do this quick because I thought it would be the best possible chance to film this video if I was sitting right here already in the zone in my classroom. Yeah, but anyway, we are gonna write this IEP. So we're going to go piece by piece. Now I just want to say every state is different. I live in New England, so a lot of the states in New England kind of do things in a similar way, but if you live in another state or even in Canada, in different provinces, I know that they kind of look different, but ultimately they're all kind of similar in that you need to write information about the child, you need to make a goal, you need benchmarks or objectives, and you need some sort of service grid that talks about the frequency and duration of the services that the child will receive. So in the end, it's all kind of the same. We're going to start from the very beginning. First part is usually the beginning page is kind of just the information about the child. Now, on the screen you can see I'll make this student's info something silly like James, oops, that way you can see James Madison. Alright, so he goes to River Elementary. And that you cannot see, of course. Alright, so we'll make his birthday. Let's say he was born January. Let's say he was born January 1st, 2013. So that makes him 6 years old. And then you would fill in all the rest of this information. This is just kind of like the data sheet that all schools need to have. So let me say that he's now 6. So we'll talk about a 6-year-old. So first grader. He'll be a male. And then this is going to get into his parents' information. So you might put that his dad's also name is James Madison. It's the father. Can't spell father. Maybe they live at 123 East Avenue in Boston, Massachusetts. So this might be the dad, this might be the mom. Sometimes your district might fill this out, sometimes you might have to fill this out. So let's say the meeting date is May 23rd, 2019, and this is an initial IEP meeting. Okay, so when you schedule the next annual meeting, it has to be a year, has to be before the next year. So I would probably make it May 22nd, 2020. So it has to be before this expires. So it might be earlier than May 22nd, but sometime. And if he was just evaluated, then you need 3 years for the reeval. So that means you need to put May 23rd, 2022. So that would be 3 years. He'll get reevaluated. He might get reevaluated before that, but who knows? So now we have more contact information, la-di-da-di-da, and the school information. This usually, you can fill in whatever you want to fill in with this. So that one's kind of set. That's usually like the first page. My camera died, so we're going to get started on the next part, which is actually writing the IEP, not just the data page. Sorry, while my battery was charging, I was feeding the classroom pet, which we have 2 geckos, and it's kind of creepy to feed them because you got to give them crickets. So here we are. We are going to get started with writing our actual IEP. Now, all right, we are in action. So the first step for the IEP is to talk about the dates. Now here I'm going to put from May 23rd all the way to May 22nd of the following year. The IEP is good for 1 year. So you have to make sure that the dates of the IEP are actually correct, that they line up, and you actually have to have your meeting to go over your IEP before the date is up from the following year. So that makes sure you're in compliance for the whole year. So we'll put our student's name, which we said was James Madison, and here we can redo our date of birth, and this would have the child's ID number if your district does that, and the grade level, which we're saying they're in first grade. Now, it always kind of starts with parent concerns. So let's say that mom and dad are concerned. Mom and dad are concerned, that James is not making progress in his current first grade class. They want to see him succeed and make friends. That's super sweet. Now you'd find these concerns at the actual meeting. You would actually ask the parents and they would tell you what they're concerned about and what they want to see for their child in the future. It's just to keep them involved in the process, which I think is great. So this part of the IEP talks about the student's strengths and the evaluation summaries. So if someone writes an evaluation, say it's a neuropsych or a speech eval, something like that, they need to type up a summary. That summary needs to go in the IEP because this section is also going to talk about how the child has qualified for this IEP. So at the bottom it might say the child qualifies under an autism diagnosis or something like that. So there needs to be summaries of the evaluation. So I'm not going to do the whole summary, but just note that if you write an evaluation on a child, there needs to be a summary of it somewhere in the IEP. So we might talk about some of this child's strengths though, because it does say student strengths. So we might say that James is a very energetic and caring boy who enjoys making new friends and coming to school. We are off to a great start, right? I'm looking at some of my notes, right? So we might say he responds well to structured environments and quality interventions. He likes to play games, talk about Fortnite, and draw pictures. You should be adding much, much more. You might want to add more to that. I'm just giving you the basics. I would beef that up a little bit. I would add some more stuff about James, some more stuff about how he overall is in school in terms of his temperament. So I would add in some more stuff about how the child is at school. We are not talking about their deficits yet. We are not talking about what they fail at yet. We are just talking about strengths. If you look at this section, it says strengths. Now, like I said, each state is different. You might only get one section to talk about what the child's good at and what the child is not so good at. But for this part of the story about this child in the IEP, it just asks for strengths and key evaluation summaries. So we might add a little bit more. We might include his evaluation. So we might leave space for the speech and language evaluation summary. Now, I'm just leaving spaces for them. Occupational therapy, evaluation, summary, and we might also include a category of disability. Now this is important. For this child, we're going to put autism because that is the primary disability that is going to qualify him for all of his services. And that's it. If you're a speech and language pathologist and you're watching this video, or occupational therapist, or a physical therapist and you're watching this video, hopefully at this point in your career, you know how to write a summary. That's not what we're focusing on. We are going to focus on the goals. But before we do, we're going to talk about the present level of performance. So some districts might put in a vision statement. Where do you see the child in the next couple years? That can be really cool to talk about in a meeting with parents, just to see, what do you want your child to do in a couple of years? What is your vision for your first grader by the time they're in 5th grade? It's just kind of cool to dream about all the stuff that the child can do. So now we are at the present level of educational performance. So this is where we talk about what the child is having trouble in, right? This is not talking about the strengths, this is talking about the challenges. So we see here, it says check all that apply. What is affected by the student's disability? This is really important. This is the educational performance. So if the child has autism and is not performing academically in all areas, then you would say that the child is affected in the areas of English, of history, of science and technology, of math. All of his academics are affected by his disability, and you will need to check all those off. So this is where we can actually be honest. How does the disability or the disabilities affect progress in the curriculum area? This is where the teacher, the special ed teacher, gets to write all that they want to write about how this child needs help, right? So I might state that James has been diagnosed with autism and ADHD. These diagnoses can hinder his ability to access the curriculum, right? I'm laying it out plain and simple. He can become overwhelmed with challenging tasks and will revert to running away, ripping his work up, crying, or what else does he do? Throwing his pencil. This is a make-believe child. I'm just trying to combine all my kids together to make a very realistic child, okay? At times, he might become unsafe, choosing to hit staff or hit another student. Yes, this does happen. All right, that's pretty real. Is that how it's affecting him? Yes. Oh, I spelled with wrong. Oops. We can add in James has challenges with his letter recognition, counting, listening to directions, and participating in classroom academic work. So here we asks what type of accommodations, if any, are necessary for the student to make progress. Every single thing that this child needs. So James would benefit from. Now, this is where you list all the accommodations that you think this child would need. I mean, as small or as big as you think they will need. I would say choices provided. Let's see. Positive behavioral supports. We might need scheduled breaks. Oops. Frequent breaks. This is what I do all day when I write this. working with familiar staff members. Anything that's an accommodation that would be helpful needs to be listed. I mean, it's vitally important, and I think anything that's listed here and it becomes part of the IEP is final. So again, if a kid were to move, this document goes with them, and then this child gets to have the same accommodations there, here, wherever. The next is how it's going to be instructed, how it's designed. So are you going to change the content of what you're teaching? Do they need different content? If they're in first grade and all the first graders are working on reading fluency and they need to learn their letters, are you changing the content of what they're learning? Yes, and you need to explain how. Are you changing the methodology? Are they, instead of being taught in a large group, are they going to be taught in a small group setting? That's methodology or type of delivery. And then the next is performance criteria. Most kids just get a report card. They get all their tests, all their homework sent home. They get little notes from home, or if they have class dojo, the teacher might speak to the parents. But if a child with a disability needs a different criteria of how to test their performance, they might need more data. They might need more teacher observations. They're going to get progress reports from their IEP every quarter. So those things need to be, I'm telling you, I keep hearing voices. Those things need to be written down. And then the next part, instead of talking just about the educational performance, there are other educational needs within the school setting, such as, PE, their self-regulation, their behavior, their social emotional needs, their language needs, communication, fine motor, gross motor. That's where all the other things come into play. So the speech, the OT, they also need to write about what the child is struggling with and how it's affecting them. Now again, if you're in school and you have fine motor problems, it's important because you can't access the academic curriculum because you can't hold a pencil, right? So you need to list all of that in the IEP. So it goes through that. Now, a lot of times the accommodations are going to be the same. They might need, again, a quiet space, smaller group, frequent breaks, different choices, behavioral supports. If they need an OT, they need an elevated desk, they need special pencil, they might need an AAC device, which is a communication device. Those are the accommodations you need to write in, okay? They need to be clear. If it's a school-given iPad, that's helping them communicate, we need that in writing, stuff like that. And then again, in terms of those other services like social work, speech, PT, OT, how are you going to change the content? Again, are you going to teach them different things? Are you going to bring them outside of the classroom, keep them inside of the classroom? Stuff like that. You need to have that written down. Now we're going to get to actually writing some goals. Now, every school district, every state has a different way of writing goals. So I would definitely check with your mentor, check with, if you're about to get your first job, I would check with all the adults, look at some example IEPs from that school so that you write them in the same way. But for the most part, they're all kind of similar. You first, again, talk and summarize the current performance levels. So if I'm talking about speech and language, I might say, James, he can use pronouns and verb tenses correctly 20% of the time. He struggles to pronounce the letters R, S, T, TH, the SH sound, stuff like that. And then I'm going to write my goal. Now, so the benchmarks need to be measurable, the goal needs to be clear and concise, and they actually need to be able to reach it within a year, right? If you have a kid who you want them to learn their letters, and the goal is that by the end of the year they're reading chapter books, that's not realistic, and there's no way you can measure that. They're not going to make it, right? It needs to be small incremental goals that the kid can actually make, and we can show that we're making progress over the whole time. So for this this goal for speech, we might say that he'll use correct grammatical forms, speech sounds, and his understanding of use of age-appropriate vocabulary and concepts. James' progress will be measured through observations, weekly data collection, analysis, and progress reports. So you need to write how you're going to measure it. Then the benchmarks, James will stabilize and correctly pronounce these different sounds, and I did it where it's by November 2019, February 2020, and April 2020, just to show how there's small amounts of progress made over the course of the quarters. James will sort relevant and irrelevant information to explain age level vocabulary and spatial concepts, and during structured activities, James will correctly use pronouns and verb tenses in simple sentences. So that's the example of the speech. I'm telling you, I keep hearing things. This is why I need to get out of this building. This is ridiculous. It's like 4:30. I need to go. Next, I'll give an example of a reading goal. So James knows 13 out of 26 letters and 2 out of 26 letter sounds. James is able to listen to a story read aloud to him for 5 minutes and is able to answer grade level comprehension questions 35% of the time. So that's where he's currently at. That's his current performance level. Now we're going to look at the annual goal. So the annual goal has to be attainable, remember. So James's goal is James will be able to identify all letters, corresponding letter sounds, and be able to segment syllables in 2-syllable words 60% of the time. We will know he has reached this goal through formal assessments, informal assessments, teacher observations, curriculum tests, and progress reports. So a whole bunch of different ways to gather that information, which I think you need multiple sources, not just one. So the benchmarks. James will be able to identify all letters in the alphabet with 70% success. James will demonstrate knowledge of all letter sounds with 60% success. And James will be able to differentiate between 2 syllables in a 2-syllable word with 50% success. Now that seems very generic. I'm giving you a generic one because in between that, you're going to work on those, right? You might work on the letter identification one at a time with visual supports, with games, with activities, right? And through that, you're going to be taking data on how many letters James has learned each day, or maybe take the data once a week and collect it. Then you're going to try to learn about letter sounds. You're going to do different activities, different systems, different games, group pairings, different things to learn the letter sounds. And you're going to take data at certain intervals. And then again, teaching 2-syllable words in the different syllable segments. Again, you're going to be using all different types of activities. And so these different benchmarks build upon each other, right? It's kind of hard to learn about the letter sounds if you don't even know the letters first. So they kind of build upon each other. Does that make sense? All right. So the last piece that I think is the most important is the service delivery. Oh my gosh, I keep looking at my watch and it is now 4:35 and I really need to leave this building. I'm done. So we're going to talk about the service delivery. This is very important. So it's usually broken up into 3 different sections. It's broken up into consultation, which is like grid 1, broken up into special ed and related services in the general ed classroom, and then special ed and related services in other settings, right? So there's a difference. So sometimes speech, OT, PT, they might have a goal, but they also might want a little bit of consultation time with the general ed teacher or with the special ed teacher, or even with the parents to call the parents. So that might go in the top, and it seems really small, but it's, for this I wrote speech, one time a week for 10 minutes, which means maybe in the morning before the kids come, the speech lady stops in and speaks to me a little bit. We touch base on the progress that the kid is making, or what we need, or schedule changes, or what would work best for the child. That needs to be documented, that we're at least talking about the child and talking about the progress, you know, or the OT wants some of that time too. Or they might want to call the parents and discuss further, maybe once a week, do a quick check-in via email or phone call, something like that. That also needs to be documented. That counts as consultation time. So the second grid, grid 2, is where you talk about the services that they're going to get inside of the general ed classroom. So they might want reading with a special ed teacher who comes in a couple times a week for 30 minutes and sits with them while they're with their regular ed peers during their reading group, and is there to offer some scaffolding, some extra support while the other teacher is teaching, right? That's still within the general ed classroom. That might be the special ed teacher, that might be the paraprofessional that's working with the child and the special ed teacher. It all depends, but you need to write that in the grid, that you think they would benefit from you know, maybe an hour a week of additional support in reading. And they might need help with self-regulation. Now, I wrote in here that it was 5 times 360 minutes. That seems like a lot, but that's just all day, right? If the child's working on their self-regulation, their behavior, being reminded with visual supports, and trying to work on staying calm during the day, taking frequent breaks, a lot of that, if they're in the general ed setting, is going to be given by the general ed teacher. That doesn't mean that all day the general ed teacher is looking and only working with that student. It just means that all the things that are set in place are working for this child by the general ed teacher and maybe the special ed teacher. And then the last part is the service delivery is grid C, which is where it's in other settings. So that's if the child gets pulled out by a math specialist, pulled out by a reading specialist, or pulled out by the special ed teacher to come into a separate office and do separate work in a quieter environment, or they can work on some remedial things. You need to document that as well, because that is not in the general ed setting or in the general ed classroom. It is outside of the room. And there's a difference, because we know that best practice is that you push into the classroom as a specialist to work with the child, so that they're not losing time with their peers and their peer models and the social models. So that is best practice. But if they need it, they might need to leave the class and come do their work in a separate setting. So you just need to document that you're pulling the child out of the classroom to come to a different setting. All of this seems very silly in all the minutia details, but it's important because everything does need to be documented clear as day, so that if you go on maternity leave, the special ed teacher can come in behind you, the substitute or somebody, and they can see exactly what they need to do, the exact time, the exact amount per week that the child is getting those minutes, so that we can be in compliance with the law. So those are the main points. Sometimes in IEPs, you might need to write a little bit about if they want extended year or summer school, if they have different transportation needs. If they get statewide testing, you just need to type or click what testing they are going to get, depending on your state and depending on your grade. And if they're getting accommodations during the school year with a scribe and a read aloud in a separate workspace and a quiet environment, chances are they're going to need to also complete their statewide testing with the same accommodations. So if you're giving a kid a scribe and a read aloud, and then they get to the state test and they don't have a scribe and they don't have a read aloud and they don't know how to read and write, then you will probably see some behaviors and their test scores will suffer. But if you write it in the IEP that they can receive the same accommodations at school as they do during their statewide testing, there you go. Recipe for success. A lot of times you just need then to go through one last time with the parents. If they accept it, then they will check that they accept it and they have to sign that they accept the IEP. If they reject it, they can request a meeting to go over the parts that they do not like. And it, like I said, it's a working draft and you get to go back and forth and keep working on it. I think IEP writing is so much fun, and I hope that this was super, super helpful for you. I know this is a strange type of video, but I'm hoping hearing the voice and also seeing some examples of how to write it can be super helpful and encouraging to you all, especially for those who are about to start as a special ed teacher. Getting in some practice writing IEPs before you start the school year is really important. So until next time, thank you guys. Bye.